Hello and good morning, you guys. Good morning. Is it morning? Anyways, wherever you guys are listening or whatever time it is, I'm Tasmin Luqman and I'm from Sinar Daily. And you're tuning in, you're listening to the Sinar Daily Top News Podcast. And today with me, we have the founder of C4. If you're wondering what C4 is, if you've never heard of C4, why? You need to start reading up on C4 because C4 is C4 is Combat Corruption and Cronyism, the Center to Combat Corruption and Cronyism. And today we have the founder, Cynthia Gabriel. Hi, Miss Cynthia Gabriel. Hi, can I call you Cynthia?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So today we're going to talk about everything that is to do with reforms, corruptions, cronyism, and where we're headed as the nation we love, Malaysia, right? Are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so Cynthia, maybe you could just introduce a little bit about yourself. I know who you are, but maybe our listeners don't. So please start.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. My name is Cynthia Gabriel, and I have been involved in good governance, human rights, and anti-corruption work for some time. So in 2015, we set up C4 Center. Just before the 1MDB scandal blew up.
Yeah.
Just before, actually. So
what was there? Was there like
a reason?
Yeah, like was there? Did you guys have like some win that something big was gonna happen?
Yes, a little bit.
Okay.
But we actually set it up because when I was also in local government in Majlis Perbandaran Petaling Jaya.
Okay.
I saw for myself how difficult it was to execute good governance and how problematic the whole issue of integrity and transparency was at the local government level because it was filled with crony politics. It was about how contracts were awarded, and how there were a lot of malpractices taking place. So it was a learning point. But on the other hand, we were already receiving stories about Prime Minister Najib at that time being involved in another scandal before 1MDB. And this was the submarine scandal.
Oh, yes, the Scorpion. Yes.
And so we received information from France that they were going to look into the whole thing because there were French officials also involved in corruption.
Yes.
And some Malaysian people were involved. So it was an interesting cross-border case. But there was no anti-corruption group in the country willing to take it up.
I mean, that was during a time where people were not so vocal yet.
They were becoming vocal because Facebook and Twitter were just
emerging,
and you had people like Rafizi also popping up, expose and scandal and all that. And then on social media, people felt empowered that they could say something, make their opinion count, etc. So there were other scandals, including like Mara, Tabung Haji,
the NFC.
NFC, absolutely correct. NFC was like the first
that was
big thing, and it was actually exposed through the Auditor General's report.
Yes.
So it was already fanning the flames, So we set up C4 Center because we realized corruption was such a big problem in the country, and there wasn't enough strength in voice coming out at that time.
Okay.
And then just by sheer coincidence, the 1MDB just
popped. Exploded,
and it put us right at the center of a lot of the things that were going on because there was so much harassment at that time to keep quiet.
Yes.
You had the media being suspended, The Edge, Malaysian Insight being banned. The oppression was real. People writing something on Facebook will be hauled up by the police and stuff. So we were thrust in the middle, and we had two choices. Either you keep quiet, do your work quietly, or you speak up and talk about
what's right,
accountability. Najib needed to answer for all these different crimes. He cannot say he doesn't know what's happening. And internationally, there were more than one investigations taking place. There were investigations in the US,
Singapore.
in Switzerland, Singapore. And you're talking about money laundering at levels that were beyond understanding. So that actually fast-tracked a lot of the work of C4, and we became very high-profile because also 1MDB created one of the world's most
biggest
interesting case studies when it came to grand corruption.
You know what's surprising? Like now, whenever we watch series or movies that involves corruption or money laundering or any sort of transfer, illegal transfer, there is always a mention of Malaysia. In the movies, because like I was just watching this new series, a Korean series. Okay, it's a Korean K-drama, and they keep talking about was the money transferred? Was the grandfather's money transferred to Labuan? It's in Malaysia, and I'm like, wow, like there's like 3 episodes of Malaysia, and surprisingly, I don't know why Labuan, but yeah.
And to think that we're really a tiny nation in the East, and we contributed to one of the largest financial heists. And the problem is, part of anti-corruption work that makes it so interesting is asset recovery. That means there are efforts
to recover the lost,
the stolen assets, the tangible assets. Of course, money lost through lifestyle and jewelry, all that you can't claim back. But the hotels, the buildings, etc. It was paid by Malaysian people's money.
That means Malaysia must be really rich to have. We should be entitled to the hotels then.
And after 10 years, we are still trying to recover the stolen assets.
Is there maybe you could help, like explain further to make things easier, right? What's the process like? Like not process specifically, but what are you guys doing? C4 doing to make sure that this is done. Like there is some justice for the Malaysian people.
Yeah, absolutely. So we then began a campaign on 2 fronts. One is why law reforms were so substantially needed and urgently needed, because another 1MDB can happen again without better financial transparency, without better accountability from people who hold important government positions, and that whole nexus between business and politics, and how businesses also need to realize that it is of no value to them to
be involved,
take part in corruption activities. So we need them to be part of the whole integrity cycle. And that's how actually the reform momentum started. And then the general elections in 2018 was an opportunity for that to happen. And so the politicians also started to ride on good governance ticket to win the election. So they also start talking about Rasuah. They start talking about, we will change this, we promise that. And then the government actually fell for the first time in 60 years. And you know what? That new government was struggling to live out its promises. Also because I think there was a lot of opposition from
the people in
the opposition parties and the Malay community, etc., to actually try and execute any of these things. And I think one big disaster then was the ICED, the International Convention
that was
on Elimination of Racism and Discrimination, and that was like too fast and too strong and too.
I think everything was just happening too fast and too big and beyond.
Exactly, and it wasn't managed properly, so they just let the chaos erupt. And then everything just got crazy. And after 22 months, Malaysia experienced a coup d'etat. you know, these
It's like
things,
tebuk atap.
yeah, these things never happened in our stable country before.
Yeah.
But before you know it, there were politicians
Jumping around and
they were behaving like frogs.
yes.
And whatever commitment they made earlier seemed
It's
to
like
be
the manifesto was just like a bunch of
absolutely. So then we realized that we can't really leave it to the politicians alone to
Yeah.
execute reforms. So we're really glad that Rasuah Busters and a few other groups emerge so that we can work better in a coalition to
Yeah.
push for these reforms.
stronger civil society, right?
Yes, a stronger voice and a stronger united voice is what will actually make a difference. Because the only thing that might irk policymakers and get them to act
Yeah.
is if their voters actually
Make a
make a stand.
Make a stand,
and
yeah.
say, do something if you want my vote.
yeah.
And so that is, I think, why there was so much focus and emphasis on the law reform part.
Yeah.
On the other side was efforts to reclaim stolen assets. And actually, when the government changed, I was appointed into the special task force under the panel of eminent persons to join the 1MDB task force.
Okay.
And at that time, it was really to help the government prioritize where we needed to recover the stolen money.
Okay.
So we decided one of the most important ones was the Wall Street Bank, Goldman
yeah.
Sachs, which actually cheated a lot on actually making money for itself.
Yeah.
And the bankers involved, Roger and Tim Leisner,
Yes.
etc., have been tried in the US.
Yeah.
Now Roger Tan has been brought back to
Roger Ng, right?
Malaysia for further.
Yeah, for the
But we have no information about what's the status.
okay.
And so this is the kind of things that C4 actually talks about. You need to tell us. You brought him back. You extradited him. What is the next
What's the
step?
next step? Yeah.
Because the US was already going to sentence
yeah.
him to jail.
yeah.
And these guys really need to pay the price because they stole taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
So it was about getting back a couple of billions from Goldman Sachs. And the negotiations are so complicated that whatever you're asking for, there's a lot of cuts and cutting corners and stuff. So
Yeah.
it's actually not so easy to get the stolen money back.
Yeah.
So that's another kind of effort. And then there's the court cases that
Yeah.
Najib is facing now. And after a lot of the SRC deliberations and trials that went through so many levels of court, including appeals,
Yeah.
then he suddenly gets pardoned, which is beyond comprehension.
Possible house arrest soon, right?
Yeah, well, one thing about house arrest is it actually doesn't exist in our law.
Yeah. That's why
It
I
doesn't.
was
It's not in the Prisons Act. It's not in the Federal Constitution. So if that addendum actually exists,
yeah.
that is actually corruption at its highest order.
Well, right now there's a lot of conversations about, it's not the government's it's not at the government's power, it's at the royal power. But then we have people like Latifah Koya coming out saying that it's not. It's the government, it's governance, it's the administration. So
that statement by our PMX was so disappointing.
okay.
Because he needs to actually show some concern and leadership, and it is not true that government is not involved because he has a representative there, the most powerful guy in there, apart from the king, of course. It's the Attorney General.
Yeah.
And the Attorney General's role is to advise the Pardons Board.
Yeah. Exactly. Because he's the law person, right? He's like the country's
legal
law
advisor
person.
of the
Country.
country and the
Yeah.
government of the day. So The Attorney General is sitting as a member of the Pardons Board. Then you, of course, have the Federal Territories Minister and so on. So it is not true that there is
And
no
the Federal
government
Territories
representation.
Minister is also a politician, like one of the people who promised for reforms. I mean,
I mean, so it's like it's mind-boggling why he would suddenly say, my hands are, I'm not involved, hands off." That was so disappointing, I have to say. And he actually needs to look at what really the Attorney General should be advising the Pardons Board for whatever reasons the previous king made. It is quite tough to challenge that, right?
yeah.
But the Bar Council is actually challenging in court the decision of the reduction of sentencing and that whole Pardons Board role
Yeah.
in the whole thing. So now there's a new reform. People want reform of the Pardons Board, and
Yeah.
people want more transparency, which is absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Until now, we have no information from the Attorney General about what made the Pardons Board decide in
Yeah.
a certain way. So we should not be taken for fools.
Yeah. There should be an explanation, like why, on what basis
and
that
this
he
is
has.
what we are expecting from PMX, who is
Yeah.
a reformist leader.
Yes.
And who struggled, who went to jail 2 times in 25 years, and who I still think he's capable of bringing reforms to the country.
Okay.
But he needs to show his constituents and the people in the country that he's actually serious about the Rasuah thing he talks about almost every other week.
Yeah.
Earlier it was every other day. But this is it, you know.
Okay.
I mean, he does need to show some kind of leadership and
You see, it's all talk and no action. Or has there been any action from your point of view?
in terms of reforms or in terms of the Najib affair.
Both.
Well,
I mean, it should come hand in hand, right? Because you're
Yeah.
trying to reform the things that had happened or has been happening. And one of the things, Najib is an example of what has been done.
absolutely. I think the first disappointment was the Deputy Prime Minister's sudden elimination of
First,
his...
Deputy Prime Minister is already one thing, right? Like,
I mean, that was like
that's
a
already
horror
one
story.
Yeah.
And
then
until now,
Uh-huh.
and then there was no real explanation. And then
Cases-
at the time, PMX said, "Oh, that was a DNAA. It was
Yeah.
a decision of the AG, and
yeah.
the courts just executed what needed to be done." And he was not involved. So, I think I have to commend the current government for taking up some serious, big cases.
Okay.
Okay, the one that involves Tun Daim
Mhm.
and people in the
Previous
previously,
government.
including Dr. Mahathir's
Yeah.
children and all that. So, what we ask is not to be selective.
Yeah.
Absolutely not to be selective. And that whole glaring big elephant in the room is that case of the 47 charges being dropped.
Yeah.
And then now there's this Najib half sentencing thing.
And possible house arrest that does not exist
now
in Malaysia.
House arrest and all that. I mean, like, hello, house arrest doesn't exist in our law.
Yeah.
And that is what the advisors of PMX need to tell him, that it actually doesn't exist.
Who do you think came up with this whole house arrest idea?
I think it was some addendum that was already in the previous king's
Okay.
pardon thing. That's
Okay.
how it surfaced. So
Okay.
now, interesting, very interesting. The key witness to that is our DPM,
Yeah.
Zahid. But Tengku Zafrul is challenging it.
Yeah.
And both are UMNO leaders.
Yeah, exactly. Do you find that interesting?
I find that amusing, actually.
Okay, amusing. That's a better word.
Interesting, amusing, and stuff. And it's like, I think the message for this podcast on these guys and the leadership that we trusted and voted for is don't take us for fools.
Yeah.
Because the rakyat is actually watching. And it is very difficult. We know it's very difficult in this whole context of racial tension.
Yeah.
You know, we are so consumed now with socks and shoes.
Yes. Oh my God. Like, why? Why? Like, there's so many bigger issues right now, and we're like socks and shoes.
Is anybody looking at how to grow the economy?
Yeah, exactly.
And put food on the table and give the poorer B40
more jobs, basically. Yeah.
So they can earn a living.
And also, inflation is insane. Like, I just saw a posting comparing 2014 to 2024. The McDonald's and KFC menu, it's like double. Like, you could have gotten McDonald's in 2014 for like the Mac Value Meal or whatever special offers for ringgit. And now unfortunately I'm not going to McDonald's anymore right now, but but it's like $15 or like $12. So like,
yeah.
Is anybody even?
And how can people afford it, right? The cost of living is so
expensive,
high.
Yeah. And there's news that the petrol subsidies is going to be pulled, and I just cannot imagine how that's going to be.
I mean, it's all very difficult also because you get poor people stealing Milo.
Yes. Yesterday there was
sentenced so heavily, and there's no issue at looking at the gravity of the crime and commensurate with appropriate sentencing.
Yes.
But you're looking at a top kleptocrat that stole billions from the country.
What is your opinion on the progress of reforms? What is your opinion on the progress of reforms as promised previously?
Well, I think as we were talking earlier, we can see that some reforms are taking place. Definitely. Like this whole thing on the death penalty, sexual offences for children.
Yes.
And on the governance side, we have seen new acts coming up, like the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which is actually quite powerful if it's executed properly, because this will make the finance minister accountable to Parliament.
Oh, that's
good.
He
needs to report. But we don't know the details yet of how it will be implemented. And then another thing they did was to prevent money laundering and shell companies, which is a lesson from 1MDB, definitely.
Yeah.
Because there were so many shell companies that were used to launder funds.
Yeah.
They have incorporated a provision on beneficial ownership. That's a big word, but it basically means that company directors now cannot use proxy.
That's good.
To register a company. So you just basically have to show yourself. You cannot use a nominee. You have to show yourself
That's
that
really good.
You are the director of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 companies.
How do we ensure that this is...
So it's about making registers under the SSM public.
Yeah.
But public, not as in public, but it is for better intelligence investigations among law enforcement.
Okay.
So for police, for immigration, for MACC and so on, to actually obtain this kind of information and immediately know, okay, this is a dubious company, it's a shell company, because there's no real
there's no director
there,
and stuff.
or there's a politically exposed person that you need to actually demand more transparency, accountability. So in the long run and globally, this is a big move to prevent money laundering and to prevent mainly shell companies. Shell company means the company exists just for a while to receive money. Then it close shop and then it move to another company. And then the money transfers. So if you study the 1MDB map, there were so many shell companies that opened just to receive money and then close shop,
So-
transfer to another, and transfer to the another. So Jolo was an expert
Uh-huh.
in moving the money around the world and using offshore islands and all that, where the taxation issues are much more loose,
Less
that's
rigid.
not so strict.
Yeah.
And many rich people actually go and start offshore accounts
Yeah.
because they want to avoid paying tax.
I mean, there's so many. We know this. We openly know all this,
so
Virgin Islands and
yeah, exactly. So one MPP taught us a lot of things, and there are some reforms that are being taken, and I believe this is also a demand from investors, that if you want us to invest, then you have to improve financial management and stuff. But the reforms that are promised and that were promised before winning the election,
yeah.
and for 25 years,
Yeah.
PKR just celebrated its
25 years
anniversary.
last weekend, yeah.
Exactly. And we know that it's tough when you're in a unity government,
Yeah.
because the members are different political parties, and they may not believe in the reform as
Yeah.
much as the original coalition.
Yeah.
But whatever it is, you need to actually move the agenda forward, because you want the people's trust based on the reform agenda
Yeah.
and the fact that you're going to make Malaysia better.
Yeah.
So very simple things like whistleblower protection, for example. And then you want to talk about a new bill like the ombudsman.
Yeah.
I don't understand why there is a delay, because these are actually going to help the government with accountability issues, and it will help the government ensure that the civil service is also more diligent and transparent in how they carry out their work, because the ombudsman is supposed to investigate. And then there are reforms to make the MECC more strong, because the MECC lacks certain powers in certain areas. And the main thing also is the appointment of the chief commissioner of the MECC and the chief commissioner of the election commission, and all these big public positions need to have a criteria and a process in which there is a nomination, and then how the PM actually chooses it when he brings the list to the Agong.
Yeah.
So right now, there is no transparency in any of it. And it's already 1.5 years since the Madani government is in power, right? And we have no clue how the next MECC commissioner is going to be appointed.
Yeah, it's still
Or the next EC chair is going to be appointed. So these are the things that you have to answer to the public. And these are the things that we are ready to actually assist the government in whatever way that's needed to make sure these things happen. So these are reforms that are not even taking place. And we don't understand why there is a delay.
okay.
Why is there a lot of repercussions? And I think we need to really devise and discern from PMX statement that the rakyat must be ready for reforms.
Okay.
So this actually means the government has to do a lot more to educate
Yeah.
the general public on reforms, because we were just talking about the younger generation not knowing a lot of these things. And so there is a responsibility on the side of the government, together with civil society and other actors, to also make that education happen.
The civil society is often seen as an entity that is criticizing the government, You're always on the other side, and you're always seen as trying to create this negative perception towards them. And some may say that because of these critical comments, it's affecting our investors, affecting our foreign image, our global image, and things like that. But what is actually the function of civil society that the government has to understand? but it's also weird because, like, I won't say weird. I don't know if the word is weird because, like, the current prime minister, is the person who has been the reformist this whole time, and now he's on the other side, and you guys are also, unfortunately, on the other side trying to push.
Actually, the only side we are on is on the side of the people.
Okay.
There's no other side. And there are 2 or 3 very clear functions of civil society. One is to be a watchdog of the government of the day. Watchdog means you are actually monitoring the performance of the government. So if you're critical, it doesn't mean you're on the other side. It means that you want the government to do better.
Yeah.
And the criticism, I accept, has to be merit-based and substantial, and must be also ready to provide solutions. So it is not about civil society being on the side of the opposition, but we are on the side of the people, and we are there to remind the government that they had actually promised A, B, C, D, E. And so even though it's very difficult when you're in power to actually make that change, civil society wants to know, and the public generally wants more transparency. And I think Madani government needs to give us that.
Okay.
They need to show they are different,
Yeah.
and that they are ready. There's some pretty excellent ministers doing their job very well.
Okay.
But overall, you don't have that sense of confidence that it is
In general, the public
moving
don't have.
forward, or the public is actually convinced
Yeah.
that this is better. And sometimes it's worse because the expectation is that you don't
Higher
become
and-
worse
Yeah.
than the previous administration. But sometimes you behave like you are just like the others or worse. And so, of course, when the expectation is higher, people feel very disappointed when you act in contrary to
What you were.
had promised. So I just want to put it right that civil society's function is monitoring government policies and government behavior, government malpractice if it takes place, because we entrust them with our vote, we entrust them with public money, that they will take care of the well-being of the country. So I think that's quite unfounded, and that there's no thing about siding with the opposition, etc. But what we actually need now is the government. Like yesterday, the Prime Minister set up a policy body,
Yeah.
right? A new one. But with that, he also needs to set up an education plan, a plan to also let the people know, okay, these are the government priorities for reform,
Yeah.
and we need your support. So if it's Raswa, you
This-
know you can count on some anti-Raswa groups to provide the other type of civil society work, which is research, advocacy, policy, recommendations, and stuff. So you can use different entities to help you. But the main thing is you need to price transparency into how you administer the government of the,
government
day.
of the day. So, like, another thing that was, I guess, discussed was the continuity of the national anti-corruption agenda that will be continued through a new strategic document known as NACS, which was previously NACP. Apparently, it will be launched this year. Don't have the date yet, I think. But what's your view on this? What's C4 and your view on this, Cynthia?
Well, actually, we have been working on tracking the NACP,
Okay.
and I was actually in the drafting committee
Okay.
in 2018 and 2019. In 2019, the NACP was launched. So I had that privilege to actually put together a very comprehensive, first-time national anti-corruption plan. We used to have integrity plan and all that before, but it was a lot softer. The NACP had 6 components, including on corporate governance, on business, on judiciary, And it was so comprehensive that we were so proud that there was such a great plan. Now it was about how do you execute it. And the execution was quite slow, even though the government is saying that they have achieved 70% or whatever percentage at this point. But there is no critical report or evaluation of the actual strength of where the NACP policies have shown a difference to the people, have shown a difference. So whether you're talking about law enforcement or the judiciary or civil service or public procurement, we need to assess critically before you move into a new program called the NACS, the National Anti-Corruption Strategy.
Yeah.
So something is going to come out in May.
Okay.
And they're going to launch the NACS. Okay, so we are tracking all that.
Okay.
C4 is tracking all that, and C4 is actually looking at why do you move to NACS when you had a 5-year implementation plan of NACP which ended in 2023. And then there was no critical evaluation on the good, the pro and the cons, the good and the bad. But now you suddenly develop a new program called NACS. And so where is the roadmap and the transparency that will be required for the people to be part of it? And so this is, again, not a criticism, but this is a request to the government to involve civil society in the whole NACS strategy.
Does it mean like they planned it, NACS was planned by them alone and there was no input from the civil society?
Yeah, I mean, I think they had 1 or 2 workshops. But how the strategy is being drafted, there's no like coming back to present
no
a
input
draft.
Or back and forth.
So there was a workshop, I think maybe last year, something in Malacca. But after they draft, you know, you want to improve your draft because a draft is a draft, right? So there's no...
Okay, so we'll just have to wait in May.
But suddenly we know, it's going to be launched in May. And then, what happened to NACP and the unfinished promises of the NACP? So the question marks probably create a bigger trust deficit of the plans. When it should not. It should be like...
It should be a smooth transition.
It's a good plan. And if it's definitely a good plan, but it was not executed properly and fully. Also because there were so many change of government. So that's a fact. But still, you need to actually be open and transparent about this. And I think this is my main message to Madani government. The openness, the transparency, the criticism, all these should be taken in stride because we all want to move the NACP further. And whatever the NACS is, we'd like to be part of that whole conversation and engagement.
Can I just ask you, you know, like, because we were talking about the AG being the advisor to the Agong, right? To the royalty. But also, like, one of the things about the Attorney General and the public prosecutor, and we're talking about the anti-corruption strategy, like how important it is to separate those powers that be. Like, why is it important for the AG chambers to be separated from the public prosecutor? Is it?
The Attorney General is a very powerful man. Woman in the country. The post actually has 2 functions. Which run into conflict with each other. One is you're the legal advisor of the government. And second, you're the public prosecutor. So that's where the conflict is. The prosecutor will find it quite difficult to prosecute the government. So
because it's like,
but he's also the legal advisor of the government. So that conflict of positions have been recognized by several other Commonwealth countries as well that have
Okay.
the same system of administration here. So, in studying the whole separation of powers, which is still going on
Yeah.
under the Law Ministry, you find that the separation is really needed because you need another person to be a public prosecutor and to act independently. So, if a government guy
Yeah.
creates a malpractice, and we have more than enough examples. Okay, so let's take one MDB and Najib again.
Okay.
It was impossible to prosecute him
Yeah.
while he was in power.
Yeah.
But only after the government fell, then
That-
only things were possible to move. The
Yeah.
Attorney General, the new Attorney General, was going to take action and all that. And then we have more recent cases like the dropping of the 47 charges
Yeah.
and all these. So all this is coming from the Attorney General's office. You can actually write in representations to ask for a reduced sentence or to ask for the case to be withdrawn because of very good reasons. So the AG will be studying it and all that. But the AG is in a completely difficult position because he's a government servant.
Yeah.
So if there's any government-related
Yeah. Cases.
prosecution, he is completely in a conflicted position.
Yeah.
So we have been advocating, like in some other countries, that the best solution is to create a public prosecutor's office. But there have been concerns about money. If you create a new office, you need to fund the staff, the people, and all that. But we are saying that's not needed. You just can use the staff in some portion of the Attorney
Yeah.
General's office staff to work for this new guy called
Yeah.
the public prosecutor. So when you separate it, one is the legal advisor of the government, one is the public prosecutor. And that seems like a major reform that is required in our country to make sure that court cases don't get pulled back all of a sudden. And Zahid Hamidi's case is not the first, the NAA case. There have been many, including Rosma's son, Riza Aziz,
Yes.
and several others.
Okay.
So what is happening is even Rosma's being convicted, right? She's writing letters of representation
Yeah,
also
to
via
drop
her
the
lawyers to get her
Cases
settled.
settled. Go away.
So this is actually a very serious abuse of power. If you actually want to
I don't
talk
understand
about it,
how is it even happening? But yeah.
it's because the AG is also pressed
Yeah.
by different forces and factors and under a lot of pressure to perform in a certain way. And he is a civil servant. So it's not like he can act independently.
Yeah.
So the public prosecutor's office must be independent. The AG can be the legal advisor. And so he's not independent because
Okay.
he's being paid by
By
public
the
office,
public.
right? So, of course, the public prosecutor also. But the appointment of the prosecutor, the roles and the functions, everything has to be very, very
Detailed and
independent.
independent. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can take on anybody, actually.
Yeah. Anybody at all, like
People in power or people who are still in power
Yeah.
but have stolen public money, etc. You should not stop them. And sometimes the pressure also comes from business.
okay.
Yeah, because
Okay.
it's all about money.
Yes. Okay, so I'm so sorry. This has been a great discussion. I think we can definitely continue in the next episode. Maybe abuse of power, understanding what abuse of power means, what happens. But to just conclude, final words, like as part of the Rasa Bahasa Coalition as well, like what are your final thoughts or recommendations for our listeners out there to understand, and what's the effort they can do to stop corruption and the demise of our country to money?
Well, the honeymoon period for Madani government is definitely over.
Okay.
And people are watching. And I believe Madani government would do very well if they would open up spaces for public participation. At local government, at state government, it's much more easier for public to participate. So when there's a project in their neighborhood, you need to actually show the public not just the signboard, like rancangan membina
Yeah.
2 blok, blah blah blah. But you need to show them
They have
what
a
you
vote?
call the BQ, the
Okay.
bill of quantities, what is actually going to be used
Oh,
to
okay.
bill, so the public can track, and the public can be good monitors for the local government and for state government, to see that the contractor is actually doing a good job. He's
Okay.
not cheating on the materials.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
you need to start like that, and
So
you need to actually ensure.
Buildings just don't fall down because of bad quality.
Yeah, so if a big tree falls after the storm,
Yeah.
you promise you'll come within 24 hours, but then sometimes for 36 hours
Yes.
it doesn't come, or 48 hours and it doesn't come.
Yeah.
And then you need to actually be more active, publicly active, to actually get all these things. So my message is that Madani government needs to open up spaces for public participation and not censor and shut down every kind of criticism there is. So this is another wrong move, I think, from the communications side, that they need to allow critical voices, voices that are recommending, because a lot of public, let's say in cities,
Uh-huh.
are clever people that are planners, lawyers,
Yeah.
and they're media people, and they can contribute in different ways. So you need to include us in a more participatory government, and most of all, the transparency is critical to making the government more accountable.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Cynthia.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope whatever you said here, we are able to further enhance the processes and make the country better. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, and I'm telling them, is it off? I'm telling
Yeah,
them.
you're telling them now.
I'm telling the policymakers
Yeah.
to walk the talk,
Yeah.
and to stop thinking that the rakyat is your critic or
Yes.
enemy, but to include us in nation building and policy making.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Cynthia. Thank you for
Most
coming.
welcome.
So thank you so much, guys, for listening. I'm Tasnim Lokman. Please remember to follow us on social media, all our social media platforms, Sinar Daily MY, and listen to the full podcast with Cynthia today to understand better on what we can do and what we can expect for the future if we want a better future, right? So thank you so much, and see you guys in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.